What's up? It's Rowan here from Artist Mind Education with the weekly HSC Economics stats update. In this episode, we're doing a deep dive on the HSC's recent report on Coles and Woolies and how you can use it, particularly for those topic 4 essays. We're also going to be looking at some labour force data that's dropped and some consumer confidence ratings. If it's your first time dialing in these episodes, I unpack for you the key stats and headlines from around the domestic and global economy that you need to unlock a Band 6 in the HSC Economics course. So let's dive right in. Now, ACCC has just released a landmark report. In fact, it's the first of its kind in over 16 years, looking at the competitive market structure in our supermarket industry, particularly looking at Coles and Woolies. Now, why this is particularly relevant is in topic 4, when you get to microeconomic reform, one of the key things you're going to be looking at is competition policy. And that speaks to the nature of competition in Australian markets and how that drives, greater efficiencies ultimately. How it drives productivity, how it influences inflationary pressure in markets. And so ultimately, this is a really modern example that you can utilize when you get to competition policy and market structures as part of topic 4 for micro reform in your essays. Now, what did the report have to say? Well, ultimately, one of the big things that really highlighted was that, yes, Coles and Woolies are amongst the most profitable supermarkets in the world. Now, what it was quite interesting was that, as the HSC Deputy Chair here, Mick Keogh, has highlighted, is that it tells us something about the level of competition here, okay? I.e., if we're able to have the most profitable supermarkets in the world, maybe the level of competition is not what it needs to be. Now, they did note that they couldn't determine whether or not price gouging claims stacked up. Now, price gouging is, designed to be basically where you're upping the prices to just purely generate profit, disconnected to, actual cost of input goods, right? And you're able to do so because you're in a dominant market position and there's not sufficient competitive market sort of structures in place. And ultimately, as a result, there's a lot of factors that combine to be able to ascertain whether or not there is price gouging. And so the HSC were unable to actually state that, right? And as they said here, it's very difficult to get to the bottom of that. The profitability figures do give you some very broad picture of what's happening, but the issue of price gouging isn't one we were able to engage in too closely. And so for many who read the report, it was quite frustrating, right? Because it really felt like the ACCC was a bit of a toothless tiger. It's like, well, they're really profitable, and that says something, about competitive market structure, but, it hasn't crossed this threshold. And that's the crux of the report. It's like, look, it's not illegal to make money. That's what our supermarkets are doing. And we haven't been able to find anything here that indicates, though, that, they're really abusing that market structure and these prices are well above and beyond, what might be expected from inflationary pressures that have been moving through the economy, and therefore we can consider it's price gouging. Now, what they did highlight was interesting was that they said it was not a duopoly. And this is important because one of the things that Australia seeks to have across our industries is something called workable competition. This idea that if we have workable competition, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to have larger companies that get to economies of scale, which drive costs down, but they're still going to be able to compete. Right, and so we've got the best of both worlds. We've got the best of economies of scale, and we've got the best of competition that comes through. And so what they've highlighted is, well, look, it is highly concentrated, but their argument is it's not a duopoly, and that's particularly because of the fact that we've got Aldi and we've got Metcash, which is behind IGA. Now, in saying that, Woolies makes up 38% of all supermarket grocery sales. Coles is 29%. Okay, so putting those two sort of figures together, right, we're getting to a point which is just short of 70% of the market, okay? So very, very significant. Now, ultimately, okay, what they said was that, Aldi represents about 9%, Metcash is 7%, okay? And so, their argument was it's not a duopoly, it's an oligopoly. Now, interestingly, an oligopoly is often what is considered to be that ideal market structure because it enables economies of scale, but it enables some level of competition. But here's the thing, and this is the real critical factor here that you can bring into a bit of analysis, is that, as you can see here, the ACCC said, but we use the term oligopoly because it basically implies that there's no need for the participants to compete strongly on price. So in other words, is an oligopoly actually the market structure that produces workable competition? Well, maybe not. Yes, we get economies of scale, but there's clearly no need for participants to compete strongly on price. What they highlighted was that Aldi, Coles, Woolies each have their established position in the market, and yes, they have specials and promotions. But when you look at their pricing in the longer term, okay, what they said was Coles and Woolies particularly, it's pretty similar. Their product range is the same. The the prices, the when even certain things go on special is like eerily at similar times. And so they've basically highlighted that it is, very, very similar. So we've got an oligopoly in place. So it was quite frustrating because at the end of the day, what the report didn't really sort of provide is that hopeful sort of report that showed that maybe because they've been making these excessive profits. Again, what is excessive? Yes, they're the most profitable in the world, but as the report said, that's allowed. That's not illegal. But I think the hope was that it would really put more of a focus on the fact that our market structure is, leaning more towards a duopoly, and maybe something needs to be done about it. And they've sort of said, well, no, oligopoly, maybe that's not ideal here. We can see that, but actually it's not in breach of anything. Now, they did make some suggestions for reforms. And again, when we sort of look at these, you'll sort of see, well, there's not a whole lot there that's going to really have a big impact. And so in many cases, it's probably a bit of business as usual. And we can see that as well because both parties, coming to election cycle, Labor and Liberal have not really engaged with a criticism of the report or really, I think, an appetite to do much in response. Now, in terms of some of the things that they highlighted, they did say that, look, shrinkflation, where the products packaged looks the same, the price might be the same, but what's included is less, right? That has often been used to hide price increases, and they did highlight that, chains under these recommendations, which Labor and Liberal, I think, broadly have agreed that they would be implementing, there would have to be much better sort of communication and messaging about that to alert shoppers. Equally, they recommended there was greater transparency with fresh produce. If you speak to and you read any data or in any sort of interviews that come from, whether or not it's milk producers, for example, they talk about the fact that, the big duopoly in their minds of Coles and Woolies and the negotiating leverage they provide really squeezes down the prices that they can charge. And there's still quite a margin that gets placed on these products in terms of what we pay for them in the shops. And so one of the other sort of suggestions here was, that there's greater transparency in the negotiations with fresh produce suppliers because they did find there was significant bargaining power imbalance here. So we can sort of see that, a couple of things have come through, but overall probably it's a bit of a disappointing result, but certainly things that you can use to speak to your analysis when you're looking at competition policy, the whole idea of workable competition in the Australian markets when you get to topic 4. Now, a couple of little data points that have dropped in. Number one, the latest labour force data has dropped for February. This came out the 20th of March, so very, very hot off the presses. Generally speaking, not a lot of shift. Trend, unemployment remained unchanged at 4%. Seasonal, it remained unchanged at 4.1. Probably the only thing that changed a little bit was in seasonally adjusted terms, we saw the participation rate decrease slightly. And again, that's not surprising coming off the back of December, January, Christmas casual work, people sort of actively looking for work for that period and then stepping back, either going back to school, university, etc. And so that is to be expected. So no real major changes here in the unemployment data. The final little thing that's worth looking at, a lot of students don't pay attention to this, but this can be really valuable to sprinkle in, certainly if you're getting into topic 3 and you're starting to do economic growth at school right now. And so one of the things to look at is that 60% of aggregate demand is driven by consumption, and consumer confidence is a really great indicator of maybe where consumption is heading and going to go. And so Ray Morgan provides a really great, CC, consumer confidence ratings. They provide a monthly. And we can sort of see here, for 2025, it's sort of floating around the 87, right? 86, high 86s, low 87s. The yearly average right now is 87. Now that's up so far for the year versus last year, 2024, and certainly up for 2023. Those 2 years were real lows of 78 and, almost 83. But you can see if we look at prior years, it's well below, right? If we're looking at even during the period of secular stagnation that Australia experienced from 2016 to sort of 2019, we were still seeing, a score that was well over 100. So we've still got quite low consumer confidence. Now, of course, we've had a couple of things play into this, right? We've had an interest rate cut that, you would have hoped would have caused a little bit more of a bump, and it hasn't really done that, as we can see here over Feb and March. But we've also had a cyclone hit, right, which would have also as well had an impact in really dampening that consumer confidence. And we can see that here. If we look at the week to week, right, we can sort of see, okay, maybe there was a little bit of a bump that started to happen with a rate cut at the back end here of Feb, but then the cyclone hit and that's come back down again. And we can sort of see that if we look at the averages for the months, right, across that period, it is still well below. And so what this speaks to, I think, is both the state of how anemic Australia's economic growth is and the fact that, we've been in a GDP per capita recession up until the last quarter. We sort of just turned the corner there a little bit, but it really does show that consumption in Australia is still very weak, and that fiscal policy and with the budgets coming next week, that it still has a lot of work to be done alongside arguably, with monetary policy. And so you can certainly use this to start informing some of your analysis around the policy that's coming through as well, but also using it to shape your understanding of economic growth. There we have it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, I will see you next week with the weekly HSC Economics Stats Update.